Hello and welcome to our second summer webinar. I'm Kate Miller, I'm Head of Marketing here at Ecosulis. Our presenter today will be CEO Cain Blythe, and he will be presenting marine rewilding, a multi-ecosystem approach. The webinar should last around 40 minutes and there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. Can I please ask you all just to pop your questions into the chat? Once Cain's finished presenting, I'll pose those to Cain at the end. We also really welcome your thoughts, experiences, ideas around marine rewilding, and if there is an opportunity at the end, we will kind of go to some live questions as well for Cain. Always kind of keen to understand how other people are working and bring different perspectives to the mix as well. The session today will be recorded, so it will be available along with the slides after the session, and we'll email that out to you all within the next couple of days. I think that's everything from me, so I'll hand over to Cain. Enjoy the session and I'll speak to you all at the end for questions. Thanks, Cain.
Thank you, Kate. Really delighted to be able to present this talk today and hopefully give a feeling as to how multi-ecosystem approaches can benefit marine restoration and rewilding. So a little bit about me. I'm a founder and owner of Ecosulis and Credit Nature. Ecosulis is a multi-million turnover B Corp certified business that's been delivering nature-based solutions in the UK for over 30 years. And we set up Credit Nature over the last 4 years, launched in November last year. And the aim of Credit Nature is a startup nature fintech business. And the idea here is to mobilize huge sums of private investment into nature recovery, whilst at the same time helping private industry create sustainable business growth. So we sort of bring to bear this combined skill set to accelerate global rewilding. So in this talk, I'm going to be looking at how important it is to consider the effect of the things that we do on land and in our rivers on marine restoration success. Because what we're seeing is that this directly affects the success of both the restoration work itself and also the potential of blue carbon projects. In fact, we're seeing failure rates of around 40 to 50% across different ecosystems. And in the case of macroalgae, kelps and seaweed, it can be as high as 77%. So I'm going to highlight in this talk that in order to minimize this failure rate, we need to adopt a multi-ecosystem approach. We also need to better understand and engage with key stakeholders, because if we can demonstrate that there's a holistic approach to these systems, this will result in much greater success overall and will have greater societal benefit. Just to start off with, I'm going to explain why, after 30 years of working predominantly in the terrestrial and freshwater realm, Ecosulis has decided that we want to direct some of our experience and resources to marine ecosystems. I'm hoping that through my explanation that will also encourage others to recognise this important connection. But I think it's also to help others imagine how they might be able to play an important role in guiding this more holistic approach to planetary recovery. So one of the first drivers that started us thinking about we needed to engage with the oceans is that back in 2013, we set our company purpose towards rewilding half the planet by 2050. So obviously this is quite a lofty ambition, and despite that, 10 years on, we have been able with this focus to achieve some amazing outcomes as a business, ones we're very proud of. And in doing so, it's really making us think about some of the bigger challenges and think about how we can mobilize others to share in that vision, but also to find ways to accelerate our impact. And one of the questions I'm often asked is, well, which half, and does that include the oceans? So that in the past has put me in a bit of a predicament, because my answer to the oceans bit was an emphatic yes, but because we didn't really have a track record, I was struggling to commit to how we might do that. In terms of the question of which half, this tends to relate to the idea that it's ensuring that at least half the planet is in a consistently recovering state instead of a degrading state, which I'm sure many of you will agree we're currently in a highly degraded set of circumstances. So this was one of our first drivers. The second key driver was the fact that in December 2020 last year, there was a landmark agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And during this framework, there was a set of goals and targets that outlined a really clear global vision for how we can live in harmony with nature by 2050. This has important implications for both land and sea. From the land perspective, we're looking at 30% of land and inland waters need to be protected by 2030, and 30% of ecosystems also need to be restored from a degraded state. This is quite a key transformation in the wording, moving from just a protection mindset to one of restoration. The GBF also calls for 30% of marine and coastal areas to be conserved by 2030, and for 10% of marine areas to be designated as marine protected areas. Now, I emphasize much of the focus in my talk here is about restoration and how we can go about that, but it is absolutely fundamentally important that we continue to protect and increase the areas of protection for our marine areas as well as those inland and in waterways. But our interpretation is that in order to achieve this, it's imperative that when we are undertaking restoration work, we're doing this in a joined up way so that we maximize the chances of success. My third motivator was actually just my daughter Jasmine. She's studying a biology degree at Exeter University. She's in her last year, and she wants to get into marine rewilding, and effectively asked me why we weren't working in marine. I didn't have a very good answer for her, so I promised her that I'd look into it. And then finally, but through the power of LinkedIn, I met Belinda Bramley, who's a great friend of Ecosulis and Credit Nature. She kindly read our illustrated book on rewilding and was encouraged to see that we recognise the importance of marine ecosystems in terms of the opportunity to maintain health of the planet, the health of the planet. But Belinda's consistently provided a gentle reminder to me to include discourse relating to the oceans in my LinkedIn posts and other media, and in particular the important role of keystone species in a marine context, challenging me to think about ways that we could restore large fauna in the oceans. Belinda also introduced me to the fascinating work of blue-green futures being coordinated by Ralph Carmi and Dinah Neiberg. So Ralph's research was very interesting in that Ralph was demonstrating that great whales, not only being majestic and awe-inspiring in their own right, they could play a vital role in the fight against climate change. So Ralph was able to do some calculations that demonstrated that the carbon that whales store in their bodies, they extract something like 33 tons of carbon per great whale, and that Ralph and the team were able to calculate the value of this carbon in the whales in terms of its removal potential. And he found that the average great whale extracted the equivalent of about $2 million worth of carbon alone. Now, this means that the current population of great whales is worth something like 1 trillion in terms of the carbon services they provide. And this could be vastly more if we help their populations recover. So not everyone accepts this research, and certainly it's widely recognized that this type of valuation doesn't take into account the vast array of other ecosystem benefits that whales can provide, not least the fact that we should value whales in and of themselves, as well as the cultural and spiritual importance that they offer to society. But I think it does highlight the fact that when we reframe the thinking around the importance of marine species to our existence, that it really brings into focus a different way of engagement. This and similar research has led to quite a growing movement in a drive to value blue carbon in all its different forms. And we often hear the statistic that seagrass, for example, sequesters up to 35 times more carbon than tropical forests. Whilst this isn't actually true for all seagrass species, I think it does highlight the fact that that the recovery of marine ecosystems has significant advantages in terms of carbon capture, and we're seeing this with kelp and mangroves as well. So it's not just limited to single organisms. But it's important also to recognise that through recovery of these ecosystems, we're also supporting an array of biodiversity and other life-giving properties. So if we take seagrass as an example, each species contributes in its own kind of unique manner to marine health and biodiversity. For instance, artificial filters from sun cream are known to significantly harm corals, yet seagrass can trap these chemicals in their extensive rhizomes, affording protection to corals. Similarly, once established, seagrass can reduce the concentration of detrimental bacteria in the water, sometimes by as much as 50%. So this can have associated benefits for marine life. Seagrass is another really essential component of why seagrass is important, is that they provide refuge for juvenile fish and invertebrates. And as we've heard before, the rhizomes lock up carbon, but as they build up, this can actually create resilience of coastlines against natural disasters. Similar benefits can be demonstrated for mangroves, kelp forests, coral reefs, and oyster reefs. So I think upon understanding this and looking into this, Ecosulis decided to take the plunge, literally and metaphorically. We were convinced that by helping the oceans, this fitted into our bigger plan, and for good reasons. Our first attempt was an excellent, but I hasten to add, failed attempt to tender for the Kent Wildlife Trust to help protect, or to do a feasibility assessment to protect and restore transitional and marine ecosystems, looking at saltmarsh, seagrass, kelp beds and oyster beds at Sandwich and Pegwell Bay. Like I say, sadly, we didn't win the opportunity. However, we were advised the only reason for that was that we couldn't meet the timescales of the project. In fact, the team, the methodology and budget that we'd submitted was highly compelling. So that was good news. But because we're relatively new to working in the marine environment, it was really important for us that we took great care in upholding the highest scientific rigor in our approach, which reflects what we do in the terrestrial realm as well, and that we base our decisions on practical experience and pragmatic approach. So to this effect, we've been very fortunate to build partnership with Dr. Ian Hendy and Dr. Ray Ward, who've got significant expertise in marine and blue carbon, and have a wide number of publications between them covering all of the groups I've mentioned before. However, more than that, they have a combined global expertise in delivering successful large-scale mangrove, saltmarsh, seagrass, kelp and oysterbed restoration projects. And this partnership has seen us appointed on a number of marine-related initiatives, such as the recent Blue Carbon Accelerator that we're involved with Bright Tide, the Crown Estate, Ernst & Young and Hogan Lovells. So part of our proposition within this accelerator was that in order for blue carbon projects to be successful, a multi-ecosystem approach to blue carbon restoration was needed. It was in fact Ian Hendy that first brought this to my attention. He kept emphasizing the scale of failure of single species restoration projects in the marine environment. For instance, in this paper from Bosconi et al., it was found that the average survival rate for marine restoration projects varied greatly, with some as low as 23%. The causes of failure were varied, but a significant contributing factor is human-caused disturbance, such as pollution, overfishing, and coastal development. Also accountable are natural disturbances such as storms, hurricanes, and sea level rise, plus poor project design, the wrong species in the wrong location, for example. The average survival per habitat after restoration are, as you can see, they're 22.9% for macroalgae, 40.4 for seagrasses, 52.2 for mangroves, 55.1 for oyster reefs, and 57.2 for salt marshes. So for someone that's been working to restore terrestrial ecosystems for over 30 years, these figures were actually quite shocking, even when taking into account the extreme weather events that we've had recently. We're used to 90+% success rates for our tree planting, wetland and grassland creation projects. So there's quite a big gap between those figures. And what, through further kind of exploration, realized that the range of stresses faced by marine ecosystems is extensive, and it can't be ignored that climate and ocean-based stresses are some of the most pressing, whether it's climate change associated with sea level rise, acidification, temperature rises, or increasingly vigorous storms. These changes are clearly having a significant impact on marine ecosystems, and unfortunately, they could become more severe in the future. The activities in the ocean that we're undertaking place great pressure from overfishing, removing some of the larger fish from the ocean, disrupting the food webs, potentially resulting in collapse of populations, as well as the mechanical damage from dredging or ship strikes for whales, for example. All of these are going to impact the chances of success and need to be taken into account overall. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm predominantly focusing in on what we can do tangibly on the land. So equally, there are lots of stresses coming from the land that can put stress on the marine restoration projects. And I think there are opportunities here, though, to address that impact, even if those effects are quite far from the coast. For example, runoff from agricultural fields and deforestation that can carry sediment into the rivers and streams, creating turbidity in the water, blocking light and smothering bottom-dwelling organisms. And this impact can run all the way through rivers and out into the coastal marine environment, alongside sewage and industrial wastewater, resulting in releases of nutrient flushes such as nitrogen and phosphorus, which can cause algal blooms, deplete oxygen levels, and kill fish and other marine life. So land use changes such as construction that can disrupt the natural flow of rivers and streams, and the knock-on effect of this is that you get much more flashy events where you're getting flushes of sediment and other outcomes in, and you wash away all the vegetation within those environments. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear from my perspective that what we do on land has a significant influence on the likely chances of success in the ocean. There's also a growing recognition that by taking a multi-ecosystem based approach, this could be the key to successfully reversing this change. And the idea here is that we want to recover and sustain ecosystem health, integrity, and resilience. And it requires an integrated approach that takes into account social, ecological, cultural, and economic impacts of multiple uses and multiple stress factors. So it's interesting to see that there's research now emerging from places like New Zealand that suggests that this approach can potentially reconcile conflicts between different user groups, because as we know, there are many different land, river, and ocean uses, and these can sometimes be in conflict. But this can help us perhaps potentially resolve mismatches and at the same time fulfill sustainability objectives. In New Zealand, the move towards an ecosystem-based approach has been driven by a number of factors, the increasing recognition of the importance of ecosystem health and integrity as a measure of success. Also, the need to address the cumulative effects of varying human activities. It's just too big a problem to try and solve in a piecemeal manner. And also the desire to incorporate Maori values and knowledge into environmental management. This was fundamentally important. So in the UK, Ecosulis was appointed by WWF UK to help develop a methodology for contribution to the Wholescape Action Research Project in North Norfolk. So this is thought to be a key component of WWF's UK strategy. And the goal is to find a way to tell the stories of the Wholescape in a detailed and compelling way that demonstrates that this approach can help address nature, climate, and support nature, climate, and people in a holistic way at the regional level by linking projects across the land, rivers, and sea. So the idea is that the project will be implemented in collaboration with people from all walks of life, from farmers, conservationists, business leaders, and community members. And also, through the outcomes of this feasibility assessment, we'll be looking at how can we help WWF influence policy and practice elsewhere in the country and also at a national level. So the really interesting part of this for Ecosulis is that what I've been describing here effectively is a rewilding approach, whereby the objective is to help restore ecosystem functions and processes, knowing that this will increase the integrity of the ecosystem over time. And this allows the flourishing of biodiversity and all the ecosystem services that we're interested in, such as carbon sequestration, clean water, well-being, all of these sorts of things. But in order to do that, we need to look at this sort of triad of dimensions. We need to look at how we restore trophic complexity with the aim of creating a web of interconnected relationships between species. This web helps to ensure that energy and nutrients are cycled through the ecosystem efficiently. We also need to look at how stochastic or natural disturbances or random disturbances are also important for ecosystems to function. Holding an ecosystem in a static state is not real. It's a form of habitat farming, because this creates new opportunities for species to colonize and thrive. And then finally, looking at things like dispersal. How can we maintain genetic diversity and reduce inbreeding with populations? This is important because it helps populations of species to become more resilient to adverse changes in the environment. So with a complex system such as this, it's really important that there are some key guiding principles that are adopted. At Ecosulis and Credit Nature, we've adopted and adapted the rewilding principles of the European Rewilding Network established by Rewilding Europe. And these ensure that we're able to apply such holistic thinking and planning. But these principles are there to create momentum and also transformational change. So they do this by recognizing that rewilding at its heart is about rekindling hope and purpose and inspiring action in people. It's a beacon guiding us towards a brighter, more vital tomorrow. It tells a compelling story of not just survival, but of thriving ecosystems and resilient communities living in harmony. So this harmony stems from nature's inherent potential to recover. By letting nature lead, we allow ecosystems to flourish and shape our landscapes and seascapes dynamically. If you can picture free-flowing rivers carving their paths, lush forests regrowing, and ocean currents shaping underwater landscapes, this principle isn't about prescribing a perfect scenario, but recognizing that nature, when allowed and assisted, can heal and regenerate itself. But our role in this story is far from passive. We embrace our connection to the land and the sea, understanding that cultural and economic ties are deeply rooted in these ecosystems. Rewilding is about finding new ways to coexist with these vibrant natural environments. It's about acknowledging that a thriving city on the coast, a farm in the countryside, and a healthy coral reef near a hotel are pieces of the same puzzle. An essential aspect of rewilding is its focus on the long term, ensuring sustained positive effects for future generations. It's like planting a tree under whose shade we may not sit, but our children and grandchildren can. So rewilding in this sense also invites us to harness nature's scale, whether it's restoring the whale and shark populations in our oceans, rejuvenating mangroves along our coastlines, or reviving savannas across the land. We're working on a grand scale, making room for nature to drive the changes and shape the living systems that we depend on. One of the most exciting prospects, I think, in this context is the creation of nature-based economies. As we enhance wildlife and ecosystems, new economic opportunities arise, generating livelihoods linked to nature's vitality. Whether it's ecotourism, sustainable fishing, or products from restored landscapes, nature becomes a vital part of the economy. But we don't want to walk this path alone. Rewilding is about working together, learning from each other, building a future that respects both needs and nature's rhythm, human needs and nature's rhythms. It's about exchanging knowledge, refining practices, and embracing the fact that there will be triumphs, but also failures, and we need to recognize that. So by following these principles, we aim to mobilize rewilding as a social movement for good, one that offers a shared vision for a future where humans and nature aren't just coexisting, but we're thriving together, be it on land, freshwater, or in the marine world. So far, so good. That perhaps sets the scene and gives you an idea of why we're doing what we're doing and the way we've come across this combined approach. But how do we do this from a practical perspective? How do we bring these multiple ecosystems and wholescape approaches to life, creating this rapid and lasting impact and change? Well, first of all, you have to really start to understand the conditions within which we're operating. For example, in England, there are different jurisdictions and competing land and seabed interests and uses. These will affect the viability of restoration activities that are undertaken. And by understanding these, this will help you pinpoint what you can and what you can't do across the land, coastal region and marine jurisdictions, all which are slightly different and potentially conflicting in some instances. It's also really important that you can understand the legal framework within which you might want to take a rewilding approach to restoration. Resources are quickly becoming available to aid in this, such as the Rewilding Law Hub launched by Lifescape Project recently, supported by Rewilding Britain and Rewilding Europe. So the hub is aimed at those wishing to begin rewilding activities, and it offers a series of legal guidance notes for a range of countries: England, Wales, Scotland and Italy and Portugal. And the aim is for this hub to be updated with additional legal notes over time. I'm sure eventually there will be notes relating to the marine environment. Currently they don't, they're only covering terrestrial realm and fresh water. But in each of the notes, you'll find that there's a summary of the relevant law, as well as practical examples of how this might apply to rewilding activities. Can't emphasize this part enough, really. Consultation is absolutely key, and this means many things to many people, but it's the right type of consultation with the right level of engagement and support will really boost positive outcomes. It will enhance the network of connected parties involved. It will showcase the dependencies and relationships needed across the land and seascapes. It's important to work closely with those communities directly affected, many who will have a clear view of how the land and sea once was, or if they didn't, they can tap into memories of these things, although we recognize that shifting baseline is a real problem in people's recollection. However, they also will be the parties who can help the delivery of a whole-scape restoration program. Without them, we can't do it, because they'll start to share stories and narratives that will really start to bring to life the opportunity that's available. And this is a really time-consuming process. It involves a lot of person hours to try and bring together all of those interested parties that have a valuable contribution to make and will understand the different aspects of a restoration. But one thing I can say is that without the support of the local community, the program will almost certainly fail. I won't go into the specifics of it, but there are some very stark examples of where failed engagement has stopped any restoration projects in their track. However, I think, once you engage in an authentic and open way, once you're confident in the support that you've got, the network effect of having so many champions approaching what you're doing will create an amplified and accelerated outcome. And this is central. It's so important to recognize that people are key to a flourishing nature, because if you can demonstrate that resilient ecosystems will in the long term provide the jobs, amenity and financial security for the local area, as well as improve well-being and opportunities for nature to recover, it's quite a hard message to turn down. Having the right type of baseline data is key. We often see a desire to capture as much data as possible, and to do it that way can be quite expensive. And I've seen research 30 years on where it still doesn't yield answers that help decisions that can be relied upon and actually engage action. So it's important to recognize that the right type of data, in my mind, is determined by the type of questions you need answering. So as rewilders, we often consider the data that gives us a clear indication of how the system is recovering. That is, can species disperse through the ecosystem? And if not, what are the barriers to their movement, and what information tells us that? Does the system support functional species known to trigger trophic cascades, such as diversity of large herbivores on land, or predatory fish and sharks in the ocean? Is there a diversity of vegetation, form and structure to provide a wide range of niche availability for different species? So in the UK, a good place to start when operating in a coastal marine context is by engaging with the Crown Estate and working your way back from there. The Crown Estate have open access databases such as the Open Data Portal that maps coastal ownership, as well as the Marine Data Exchange, which provides access to over 300 terabytes of survey data, over 2,600 survey campaigns, ranging from geophysical data to marine mammal surveys. So this is a good place to get going and see where there might be gaps in the data. On land, we've got something similar where we're looking at things like data from local biological record centre, access to Google Maps, also the government's Magic portal, which allows you to start to work out different land use management practices, protection status and things like that. But you can't also ignore the fact that by speaking with land managers and custodians, that's one way of engaging as well, but they also have insights and knowledge and networks that you can tap into for good data. So there's obviously a lot more to it than I've described so far, but hopefully that gives you a feel for the possibilities that I've described. So now I'll sort of dig a bit deeper about some practical tips or even quick wins, if you want, for considering how to approach a multi-ecosystem or whole-scape methodology. So one of the starting points is it's important to recognise that some land use, coastal and marine practices are just simply degrading and damaging for ecosystem integrity. We want ecosystem integrity to be recovering, not degrading, because if they're in a degraded state, they have low productivity, and just stop offering the ecosystem services we need, from water attenuation to carbon sequestration, food production, or even the recovery of the asset. If we don't alleviate the pressure, at least for enough time, the integrity of the state means that we'll see further losses in biodiversity, reducing the quality of food, the water and atmosphere. So intensive grazing, for example, within a coastal wetland or salt marsh can seriously adversely affect vegetation structure, erosion levels, contamination, and unless we address these things head on, and it's quite a quick way to do this, we're going to continually be fighting an uphill battle. In fact, I saw I think it's a UNDP publication that reports that we're still spending 7 times more on degrading activities than we are on restorative activities. So there's money out there to be invested, or at least converted to things that are restorative. So on the other hand, introducing naturalized grazing with species that are known to have beneficial effects on vegetation structure, wetland geomorphology and nutrient loading, these can all contribute to the key dimensions of ecosystem recovery that I mentioned, by aiding the dispersal of species, creating natural disturbance, and influencing the trophic cascade in a positive way. So heterogeneity or complexity is important in all ecosystems. So we've spent much of our history taming and ordering our environment, creating straightened edges, straightened channels, in the belief that that gives us perhaps more control over the wild. But as we know, we forced it too much, and the outcome is that it can no longer function. And it's, in particular, we've made it too easy for water to flash flood off the land, spate across into rivers, washing away chemicals, topsoil, nutrients out into the ocean. So by creating a structure within our landscapes that's more varied and more colourful, multicolored, we actually are able to address some of these things. So it's just a conceptual model for how we need to think and look at our landscapes. So, and this is difficult because I think in the UK in particular, but in other places where we have this romantic notion that a rolling, lush green hill or a barren, uninterrupted view are indicators of a healthy landscape. But sadly, it's more an indicator of a forced environment, one that's degraded and in a low ebb, and doesn't have much potential to provide the services that we depend on. On the other hand, a landscape that's messy, colourful, impenetrable, with a patchwork of vegetation types. Here you're introducing variation in species. You're creating structure and form in the landscape that doesn't require lots of soil sampling. It doesn't require lots of biodiversity assessment. It's an indicator, when you have this variability, this messiness, it's an indicator that the soil is healthy or in a recovering state, which means it has more capacity to attenuate or slow water, increases the carbon biomass, and reduces unexpected events such as wildfires or floods. Also, over time, you'll see biodiversity will emerge if we can connect these landscapes, and they will start to flourish in such locations. So within our landscapes, we want to be able to remove barriers to movement, and particularly allow mixed groups of large mammals to move as freely as possible, transporting seeds and nutrients as they do, not spending too much time in any one location, giving time for the ecosystem to rebound in a continual and cyclical nature. This is true on land and also within rivers. We have many obstructions in our rivers now that are either out of use, defunct, or of unknown purpose, bygone relics of an industrial past. So But in Europe, hundreds of dams are now being removed because they no longer have a function. And the aim here is to help re-establish the natural function and flows of the river and allow the rivers to naturally change their course over time and remove obstructions that will facilitate this process. And the reason this is important is that it begins to help restore the hyporheic zone within rivers. This is the layer of saturated sediment beneath the stream or riverbed. It's a dynamic and important part of a river ecosystem and provides a whole range of benefits. So moderation of stream temperatures is really important. So storing cold water, which is released in periods of high water temperature, which has a continually cooling effect. It also improves water quality, filtering out pollutants and nutrients from the surface water. Microbes that are present in this zone are known to break down organic matter and then release nutrients back into bioavailable nutrients back into the stream. And the hyporheic zone also provides a unique habitat for a variety of aquatic organisms, including bacteria, algae, invertebrates, and fish. So these are invertebrates that some ocean-dwelling species such as salmon, for example, depend upon. So these processes can, within our river systems, be aided through the use of practices that we can get involved with, such as natural flood management techniques, using large woody debris in rivers, for example, to create diversity in the water channel, create pockets of different substrates. We can also use integrated constructive wetlands, which aim to remove organic and other pollutants from the waterway, all as well providing spaces for biodiversity. And then better still, if we can, let's give nature the space it needs to do what it does best. You know, beavers are renowned ecosystem engineers, and I'm sure we'll all remember the headlines from last year where areas supporting beavers were those which were most resistant to drought. So as mentioned at the beginning, the aim of all of this really is to reduce the extent to which the activities of our activities on land impact on coastal marine environments. We're trying to reduce the pollution, the erosion, microplastics and other stressors coming from land into an area where we want to restore marine ecosystems or create blue carbon projects. In fact, what we want is a greater confidence in the impact that our money invested, and it will require a lot of money to reach what will hopefully be much greater chances of success. I don't know if it's possible, but I'd love to see the 90+% success rates that we see on land as a way of, in combination, addressing the combined biodiversity, pollution and climate crises. So the fantastic news is that given the right conditions, so if we do all of the things that I've just talked about in a structured way, marine ecosystems can rebound and quickly. Our marine partner, Ian Hendy, and I were talking about this not long ago, and he said, look, if you get those bits right, we'll see really quick results when restoring seagrass, kelp and oyster beds. They respond so quickly to conditions within which they can thrive. The turbidity, where the turbidity chemical balance, the nutrient levels are right, and the area is protected against mechanical damage from dredging and fishing, for example. So actually, I wouldn't go as far as saying the easy bit is the restoration in the marine context, but certainly you will get very quick feedback, and there are some great success stories all over the UK and around the world. So I'd encourage you to look those up. I think it's then also important to recognize that in addition to that, we have to start thinking about functional species and the importance of functional species in all ecosystems. And this is one of our real keys to reversing the negative anthropogenic influences that we've unleashed. So whether it's beavers, wildebeest, sharks, fish or bison, research now clearly demonstrates that nature is our biggest ally in the fight against climate change. with some projections that we could actually mobilize this to keep us below the 1.5 mark. Wildebeest lead to a reduction in wildfires. Sea otters restore trophic cascades in coastal kelp forests. Shark do the similar thing in coral reef. Muskox, their grazing and trampling in Arctic ecosystems help lock in permafrost. And increasingly, it's being recognized that mesopelagic fish contribute significantly to the marine fish carbon flux. So animating the carbon cycle in this way will accelerate recovery and resilience, and will really give us a way of fast tracking some of these ambitions. Of course, in order to achieve all of this, you need to have the vision, partnerships, money, and drive to make all of these things happen at once. It's a big ask, I appreciate that, but it is possible. And whether you're looking at the 10 rewilding areas across Europe, supported by Rewilding Europe, to the Patagonia Azul in Argentina, as well as the hundreds of thousands of hectares within the Rewilding Britain rewilding network, plus all the other independent projects and activities and drives going on, there's a collective and social movement willing to make these things happen. And increasingly, the marine environment is being included in such plans. One of the most recent and exciting examples for me is the UK Wheel to Waves project, which has the ambition of creating a 100-mile nature recovery corridor across Sussex, and the target of boosting biodiversity, capturing carbon, enhancing food production, and enriching the rural economy. And it's been established by a network of farmers and land managers in collaboration with councils, researchers, wildlife charities, schools, gardeners, and even community groups. So for me, it's an exemplar of how you can establish a program of recovery incorporating land, freshwater, and the marine environment. So as we zoom back out, for me, the potential for marine rewilding is immense. It can significantly contribute to global goals for biodiversity conservation, climate mitigation, and sustainable development. But to realize this full potential, we do need a paradigm shift in our approach, one that's firmly connected to the land. We can't ignore the interrelationships between what we're doing here, our river systems, and the oceans. So we need to embrace the complexity, acknowledge the interconnectedness of life, and work with rather than against nature. I think if we do that, we can transform our seas. We can also strive to recover the land and rivers, maximizing the full potential for communities and the economy. And I think this will help generate sustainable practices that will benefit generations to come. So that is my talk. Thank you very much. I hope that gave you food for thought, and I'd love to hear your reflections, and would welcome any questions as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Cain. And just from my own point of view, I think the our kind of multi-ecosystem approach has definitely been kind of a aha moment for me. I've kind of been with Ecosulis just under a year now, and I think it's just given me such a deep understanding of why connectivity of landscapes and projects is just so crucial to nature's recovery. And I'm hoping you've all kind of taken similar away from this as well. We've had absolutely loads of questions, and Chris has done a fantastic job kind of signposting people to different resources. But I was really keen to kind of get some of your viewpoints on those, Cain, and then maybe try and open up a few comments as well, as we've had quite a few experiences shared, which is great. So just bear with me. I'm just going to go through them and pull out some of the key questions that I wanted to put to you. The first is from Matthew Ling. Just bear with me a second. Just sifting through them all. He did note that he may be preempting some of your content, but he wanted to know, how do you define or differentiate rewilding versus restoration of marine and coastal habitats?
Yeah, so rewilding, hopefully, as I've emphasized in this talk, is very much about understanding the different dimensions of ecosystem function and processes that are a key target of any restoration practice. So where we're looking at the ability of species to disperse and move through an ecosystem, recognizing what barriers are there to that movement. Also then identifying the trophic function and cascades, the food web associated with that, and the importance of natural disturbance and the complexity that creates within an ecosystem. And within rewilding science, it's looking at the interaction and sort of losses and gains across those different dimensions of an ecosystem. So, I mean, we tend to see that ecosystem restoration or rewilding is a facet of ecosystem restoration, but rewilding has a specific focus on those different dimensions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cain. Next, we had a comment from Andrew, which I'm just trying to find. Andrew made a comment rather than a question, but turbidity seems like a biggie that is influenced by many other land users as well as already degraded habitat states. And Chris had referred to our Belmont estate and how the work that we're doing to slow the flow of a local river by rewiggling it and adding wetlands, which could ultimately reduce turbidity of the system. Just keen for your thoughts on that, really, of whether you feel that how important it is.
I mean, it's really important, and we are looking at developing metrics for measuring the ecosystem integrity of fresh water via an Ofwat challenge currently. And certainly one of the headline dimensions of that is the flows of water, how the holding time of water, it's the ability of water to infiltrate and attenuate within the landscape. And wetlands do a fantastic job of that in the sense, and we've got hugely depleted wetlands around our coastlines and everywhere else, that if we can start to restore wetlands in the right places and recognize that they have a really powerful way of reducing things like turbidity and chemical loading, and at the same time they encourage biodiversity to emerge quite quickly again, get quick results with wetlands, then the idea here is that tends to improve water quality going into the rivers, which downstream will benefit the coastal communities and the marine environment.
Great, thanks so much, Cain. We did also have an interesting question from Rebecca, who referred to the Conservation Science and Practice Journal. So it may be a tricky one if you haven't read it. But Rebecca asks, how do you define ecosystem health and integrity? And in relation to the article, the argument was around the ecosystem integrity is neither real nor valuable. So she was keen for you to explain how you define its health and integrity.
Yeah, so I think from the perspective of ecosystem integrity, it very much comes back to those dimensions which I mentioned before. It recognizes that in order for an ecosystem to function, there are some fundamental dimensions. It's not, those three I've identified doesn't define everything that's going on in an ecosystem, but if we get those right, if we get the ability of species to disperse, the trophic function and food web, and also the natural disturbance and the heterogeneity and diversity that can create, that measure of ecosystem integrity is, in our experience, because we've applied it, is a very good indicator of how land, rivers and marine environments will respond. So there are activities that we can undertake that are known to result in a deterioration of ecosystem integrity, and those that will enhance that. And this is recognized, so it's not just us saying this. This is recognized by the 180 odd nations that signed the Global Biodiversity Framework, and ecosystem integrity is up front and center in the framework under Goal A, that we need to help restore ecosystem integrity in order to gain the benefits, the ecosystem services that we all depend upon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cain. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then see if there's anybody that wants to kind of share a viewpoint or their experiences. I've got a question from Vincent. He asks, blue carbon or biodiversity projects can be much more difficult to manage versus terrestrial projects because of tenure and identifying the right project stakeholders. How do you go about solving for this? Are you focused on specific types of projects?
Yeah, no, I think that absolutely correct in terms of one of the key challenges there, and the approach that we and others are taking is are to identify, to filter those opportunities, speaking with organisations like the Crown Estates, who've got a much clearer idea in the UK context of those land management, those jurisdictions and land ownership, although even they would admit that there are some areas of coastline that they still don't really know who owns it. And then if you amplify that to countries where they don't have as many clear land rights and seabed rights as the UK, it can certainly be a major challenge. And I think in part the way you do that is to try and find those demonstration areas, those places where you have more confidence that you have a forward and progressive thinking community of support. Because I think what you tend to find, and this is another really important aspect of rewilding, is that if you can demonstrate the benefits of what you're talking about rather than just talking about it, then that is a catalyst for much faster change. And we've seen this in the UK as an example, behind the curve, perhaps in terms of rewilding, behind mainland Europe and America. But actually, since it was established, since Rewilding Britain and other organisations were established, we've seen an escalation of the ambition and support for rewilding projects.
Great, thank you so much, Cain. And there's a question here from probably the last one, from Matthew. We do get asked a variation of this question quite a lot, so I think it's quite a good one to pick up. What's your point of view about transforming agro-ecosystems where desired state is going to be far from wild, but certainly incorporating more wild?
I'm not sure I entirely understand. So are we saying keeping a landscape in an agricultural practice but making it more wild at the same time? Is that?
That's my understanding of the question.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, rewilding falls on a scale as far as we're concerned, and it's more about the trajectory of travel that's important. So moving towards a recovering state is really key. And so even within a degraded agricultural state, you can move to a state of recovery. And many of the projects we're working on are very focused on working with land managers, landowners, land custodians to work out what it is that they can do on the land that would still lead to them being able to produce food, but at the same time encourage areas that nature can rebound. And this might be using, for example, we do this quite a lot, using no fence collars to move animals, different guilds of herbivores, move them around the landscape in a less uniform way, so that you create variability within the landscape, so they still are able to produce food on those land holdings, but you create a more varied and wilder environment at the same time. So it's just coming at it and thinking about things slightly differently.
Brilliant, thanks, Cain. And if you are interested more in kind of ecology tech, Ella Milne did a presentation last week, and we've got a recording of her webinar on the website if you'd like to have a look. Just go and have a look. If you can't find it, let me know and I can send you a link. That's all we've got time for. We are at time, well, 1 minute over, so we did pretty well, I think. Thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you for Cain's time today.